So unfortunately, this video comes out a bit late after all the news about this move happened due to the fact that the original video I did corrupted. I wasn't able to get it uploaded. I had other content I was uploading at the time, so I just never got back to it. But I did want to address this, even if it is a bit late. And of course, this is the Swedish shuffle that took place between fnatic and Godsent. And if for whatever reason you're unaware of what the move was, we had fnatic basically return to their older lineup that they had at the end of 2015 and then going into early 2016, which is a lineup that features Olaf Meister, Krims, JW Flusher, and Dennis. And then Jumpy will still be the coach of the team, who has been for a decent while now, towards the end of 2016. And then Godsent will return to almost one of their original lineups towards the middle of last year, which is going to be Pronax, Schneider, Lekro, Twist, but instead of Palf, they're going to have Disco Doplin and still RDL as a coach that they've had for quite some time, almost since the conception of Godsent, I think. So you basically have two rosters that have come full circle. They had started out with particular lineups. They had decided to make changes throughout the course of like the last half of 2016 on a couple of different occasions, and now they've kind of come back basically to where they were at, like I said, at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, basically. And so it's kind of crazy to think about how all of that worked out. As of course, you know, this fnatic that's coming together, like I said, identical 5 to the ones that we saw in the 2015, early 2016. And I remember even back then, it was very shocking to have seen the move take place, because way back when, you had this fnatic team that won 6 events in a row, and all the events that they won were incredibly stacked. They were beating NIP multiple times, Virtus Pro multiple times, Luminosity Gaming, of course now SK, multiple times. The Danish team, like TQM, Team Question Mark, which became Astralis, they beat them on several occasions. They were beating FaZe, they were beating the French teams like Envy and Titan, and of course what became the French G2 team. They were doing fantastic things winning those 6 events. They looked incredibly powerful, and it was starting to look like they were going to make one of the best lineups of all time in CSGO's history, which some people would still be able to argue, I think. And I would argue that that lineup, even though it was short-lived, was still one of the most dominant lineups we've had in CSGO's history. And then after those 6 events they won, they did have their issue. I mean, they only made it to the quarterfinals of MLG Columbus. They got beat out by Astralis there. Of course, there was some injury things surrounding that, of course. They took 2nd at E-League Season 1. They took top 4 at ECS Season 1. And then they took top 4 at the Cologne major, the last major 2016. I think that was in July of that year. And so even when they weren't winning events in a row or winning titles anymore, they were still placing top 4. Like their worst placement was a quarterfinals exit at MLG Columbus. So they were still a very strong team. And so I remember at the time it was very shocking that this 5 that's now going to be the current fnatic broke up. It seemed odd. It seemed like maybe there was some internal issues going on, some friction, some politics or what have you, that maybe not everyone is aware of. You know, that certainly is part of it. It also just seemed like maybe some of the players wanted to go to an in-game leader like Pronax, when they had had success with in the past, obviously, you know, in the other fnatic lineup that was so dominant, that won 2 majors and won all these other titles and all these other top 4 finishes, you know, particularly through a lot of like the later half of 2014 and all through 2015. Until they started slowing down just a bit, and that's whenever this 5 came together with the current 5 that they have now, basically the old, the new, same lineup. It gets a little confusing there. So it seemed like they wanted to go back to Pronax when the players did, particularly, you know, guys like Flusher, Krims, and JW who left after ESO1 Cologne, and I think it was August of 2016 that first roster move took place between these two teams, to just maybe get to someone who actually brought some tactics to the table, who was a more structured in-game leader, because obviously fnatic was very well known for just playing this incredibly loose style of CS. There's really no one that plays like fnatic. I mean, even some of the other teams that were quite loose and quite aggressive, like the French teams, like Envy and G2, just fnatic was at a whole different level of extreme. They, you know, didn't even necessarily always have fixed positions. You could see people moving around a lot between what roles they were playing. The op was passed around like it was musical chairs over there. You could see any one of 4 players opping. There were games where I legit saw 4 different people touch the op throughout the game. Like, it was just crazy. You know, not many teams really do that. Like, the only other teams I can think of that pass around the op that much would be like Virtus Pro to a degree, Optic to a degree did for a bit. So yeah, it's just very rare what they would do, and just how they would get away with things that you feel like no one else really could, particularly just because their individual skill level overall as a unit was just so damn high. I mean, you had multiple players on this team probably playing the best CS of their careers, you know, during this period. I mean, Olaf had been doing it for quite some time, and Krims had his period of being a best player in the world as well in earlier Fnatic lineups, but they were still at the peak of their powers, basically, during this stretch of winning 6 events and even getting some of these top 4 finishes and such. And so it was kind of crazy to see them break up, but again, it just felt like maybe they wanted to get to a more structured system, because obviously the in-game leadership on Fnatic had moved around between like Dennis and Flesha, and Flesha's gameplay did go down. He was in-game leading, it seemed like, and so there certainly was their issues there, but still just an incredibly successful team, and so it was crazy to see it break up, but obviously it did, and both teams went their different ways. I mean, we had the original lineup change, like I said, in August of 2016, where you did see, like I said, JW, Flesha, and Krims go over to Godsent alongside Pronax and Schneider. And then you saw Fnatic left with Olaf and Dennis, and then they got Twist and Lekro from Godsent, as well as picked up Winton, who was someone who stood in for them during Olaf Meister's injury, because the whole Plessen thing didn't really work out, their initial stand-in, so they had this Winton guy stand in, so he comes on board. Vago's on board as a coach, but Krims, very quickly switches back. I think only maybe a month or 2 months after the original change, he actually goes back to Fnatic, and so you see like a swap back basically between Lekro and Krims, and now of course we have the move now where everyone's basically come full circle, with the exception of Palf is no longer involved, and now Disco Doplin's going to be playing with Godsent going forward, and so that really kind of chronicles it. And for Godsent, they obviously had their issues, right? And so it makes sense that guys like JW and Flesha would want to go back to Fnatic, simply because Godsent, you know, missed out on the Season 2 of E-League because of that crazy upset loss to alternate attacks, and they lost to Pride in the Las Vegas qualifier, so they didn't qualify for that event. You know, this team that, you know, is basically unheard of beat them, and that even caused them to not want to go to WESG anymore, and that was obviously some drama as well. So there was a lot of woes surrounding the team. They also didn't look so hot at like that Starlighter Season 2 finals with I-League, and they didn't do so hot at the Gfinity Invitational either. So they were having a lot of issues. Like, the only few good things that Godsent really had going for them was the fact that they had qualified for the E-League Major in pretty sharp fashion. I mean, they swept through that, and really shocking everyone, because everything leading up to that wasn't looking so good, between like the mixed online results and some of these, you know, land showings I've mentioned. And then at the E-League Major itself, they go out in groups, but I mean, they went down with the fight. I mean, they got eliminated by North in overtime, so they were actually close to making a quarterfinals appearance and maybe upsetting North and making it through. But again, there wasn't a whole lot of success for Godsent. For Fnatic, I mean, the 5 they had there at the end that included Disco Doplin, the only event they ever played with that full 5 was the E-League Major, which is where, of course, they made the quarterfinals of the event, made the semifinals, top 4 finish, you know, after beating teams like North Mouse and Envy in the group stage, after their opening loss to G2, so they go through, you know, 3-1 to get out the group. They beat Gambit in the quarterfinals 2-1, and then they lose to Astralis 0-2, very close first match that went into overtime against the eventual champions Astralis. So they had a really good showing, which was basically the only LAN that 5 will have ever played together. So for a one-off event of that 5, that's a pretty crazy showing, to be honest. And then other than that, you know, they only really played 4 offline events total with any version of the Fnatic lineup after that initial change they had in August 2016, where they swapped 3 across the 2 teams. So to be fair, we never even really got to see Fnatic play a whole hell of a lot offline to really know what could have happened with that team without bringing back JW and Flush. And so that'll always be kind of a curiosity of mine, since the only time we saw the 5 play was E-League Major and they get a top 4 finish. What could that lineup really have done? Would have been kind of neat to understand. I mean, certainly they had their struggles, though, right? I mean, they had that 5th, 6th place finish at ESL1 New York, where they lost to Liquid twice in Dust 2 games and got beat in the group stages of that. They obviously went out in groups in E-League Season 2, but that was with Jumpy standing in for who was arguably their best player at the time, Dennis. For whatever reason, he couldn't play. I can't remember why that was the case, but he couldn't, and so they obviously exited groups at that offline event. But again, you know, there's kind of that asterisk next to it because they weren't even playing with their actual 5 at that event. So yeah, I don't know. Like, it's kind of like, obviously both teams weren't achieving what they wanted to, and so it makes sense both teams would want to make moves. But obviously Godsent was really the one that was struggling, while fnatic, like I said, the sample size is so small to have really known what they would have done. But, you know, obviously these players want to get back together again because of the success that they know that they can achieve. Because, again, we talked about just how good this 5 really was that fnatic will have going forward with the 6 titles and the top 4 finishes, and we talked about how surprising it was they broke up because of all that. During that stretch of time when they were playing all of this, their players were in absolute fantastic form. Again, Olaf was still at the peak of his powers up until MLG Columbus, of course, when the injury situation started setting in. Now, going into the future with this current fnatic, will that still be the case is kind of a big question mark. I thought he played pretty well at the E-League Major, but he obviously isn't putting up, you know, the big, you know, plus 40 to plus 70, you know, KD ratio that he was doing, you know, during this stretch at the end of 2015, really through a lot of 2015 actually with fnatic. So he's not going to be the same player, but if he can actually get back some of that form, which I feel like we saw a little bit of that at the E-League Major, you know, he obviously is a very flexible player, plays a lot of peripheral roles, also can do some opping, just this very flexible player, and when he's hot, he's certainly a strong player. When you look at Crims, he was also fantastic during that 6-event run that they were winning. Certainly had his struggles on Godsent. He's come back to fnatic. He looked really good at the E-League Major, in my opinion. And that Olaf-Cribs duo has always been quite legendary, right? You know, this is a duo that is really up there, like with a Get Right Forest or a Cold Fallen. You know, some of the more successful duos in CS:GO history, particularly like playing bomb sites together. Even like I think of Banana on an Inferno as being a spot they were really good syncing up with and putting up just excellent defenses. So there's definitely a lot there between those two players in particular. Then you have someone like Flusha, who's been a fairly consistent player. I will admit he struggled a bit, like at Frag Out Masters 5 and EPL Season 2 when he was in-game leading. His numbers certainly did deteriorate. But otherwise, throughout all the other events he played, he was always fairly solid. He was really one of the stars of the Godsent lineup while he was on that team, one of the guys that seemed to be putting up the numbers despite the struggles the team overall was having. And so he's certainly a key piece, I think, to this team. And apparently he will be in-game leading again. So I am a bit curious if in-game leading again is going to affect his play and how fnatic will play with him as a leader. Again, very loose style through pretty much all of 2016 and even going back in 2015 with this original 5. I don't know if that style will really work now. We'll just have to see. I'll talk about that towards the end of the video, actually. I don't want to get into that just yet. Finish off the roster. We have JW coming back. Obviously, he had his ups and downs, but he's looked pretty solid lately. And also during the 6 tournament win streak they had going there, he looked really good in some of those events, particularly the last 3 events they won. He was actually getting into some really good form. And so certainly a player that can add something there. And then you have Dennis, who had a slower start when he first joined fnatic, when he was first kind of blending back in. Obviously, some of these players he played with on LGB, but as he was blending back in with this fnatic lineup, he certainly had a little bit of a rough start, but he developed into being one of their best players. Like when you get towards that SLI League Season 14 finals, and the Barcelona Invitational event, like those were events where he really started hitting his stride and he became one of the best players on the team. We'll admit that he struggled at this E-League Major we just watched, but I feel like that's going to be like an outlier. I feel like overall he's going to be able to perform pretty well. Obviously very, great with pistols, obviously can help with leadership as he's been in-game leader at times. So yeah, I mean, this is just a team that has a lot of sick players, and if they get in good form, they can certainly be dangerous. Now, one of the other big things about this fnatic 5 that they have back, going back to when they were having their dominance at the end of 2015 and into early 2016, is their map pool was also insane. You know, Cash, they were 13-4 offline. Cobble, 13-4. D2, 12-4. Inferno, 17-3. Mirage 9-8, Overpass 3-3, Train 7-4. So that were their records on all the maps in the pool at the time that they were playing together. Obviously, now it's a bit different because we have Nuke and D2's out and Inferno's back in. So there's some differences there, of course. But they had 4 maps they were just absolutely dominant on. That was, of course, Cash Cobble, D2, and Inferno. Inferno obviously being their best map. Mirage, they were kind of hit or miss, I suppose, 9 and 8, but still a winning record and still could put good showings on that map. I feel that was the map that they actually lost a little bit of their power on when Pronax left. Like, that was the map that really seemed to break down for them. I even wrote an article about this a long time ago on what is now Splice's website. It used to be Follow Esports. I did like a study of the new fnatic, and I talked about how their Mirage really did seem to struggle, like underneath Flesha or Dennis's in-game leadership compared to Pronax. That they weren't as good at managing like mid-round, mid-control situations, and they seem to be more reliant on aggressive executes, and they just weren't getting the same results there. Like, compared to when Pronax was the in-game leader, Mirage was another very powerful map for them. That seemed to slide a little bit for them, but still a winning record on the map. Then Overpass, that was one of the maps they really didn't play, but even when they did sometimes get forced to play it, they still managed to have like a neutral record on the map. And then their train was also pretty decent, 7 and 4. Again, not one of the maps they played a whole lot. Overpass and Train were the maps they played the least amount, but still, even on Train, they managed good records. So yeah, their map pool was insanely deep. They had an insane amount of talent, despite the fact that they had their shortcomings strategically. They could get away with playing a loose style because they could rely on individual talent to find picks or find openings, or just be really aggressive and just run down a site with brute force with all the talent and just break it down. Obviously, their CT sides were very strong because of the amount of skill they had across the team, and the fact that you had some people who were some of the best players in particular positions that they played. Particularly, like I said, the banana hold that Olaf Meister and Krims could have is just one example. But yeah, they just had so much going for them. Now, the question obviously will be, can they return to dominance? And I think that you'd be crazy not to think that they'll still be a good team. Like, they'll definitely be a top 10 team in the world. I would assume they would be somewhere in the top 5. I think there are some teams now that match up with them skill-wise really, really well. Like, they're not going to have a huge skill advantage as much anymore against a team like an Astralis, or like if VP's in super sick form, then that's a team that can still battle them. I think the SK team certainly has a lot of skill in that lineup, though it is true that when they were LG and they still had FNX on the team instead of what is now Phelps, they really struggled to beat Fnatic. That was kind of their kryptonite. They never really did beat that 5. That just never really happened. Until you started seeing like injuries come in for Olaf Meister. Maybe then that was the only real difference. They never really legit beat Fnatic, it felt like. That was kind of the one thing they didn't even they couldn't get, despite accomplishing so much, like winning 2 majors and all that good stuff. But certainly in the present day, an SK lineup has a lot of skill to match up with them, like an Astralis does. I think this new G2 French super team lineup certainly has a lot of skill to match up against Fnatic as well. So again, Navi, they have a shit ton of skill on that team as well if they can figure things out. Obviously, their CT sides look really sharp at the E-League Major. T sides still seems to need work. But again, there's a lot of lineups out there that can stack up the Fnatic skill-wise. So I don't know that they'll have as much of a skill advantage as they did before. Because like before, Navi didn't have as much skill as they had now, particularly since Guardian was really struggling ever since MLG Columbus. So yeah, like, I think that's one thing you have to take into consideration. I think you have to take into consideration strategical elements as well. You have a lot of teams out there that are so tactically strong, like an Astralis, like an SK, like a North, like a VP. I know they're obviously known for being very aggressive, but tactically they were really strong. Unfortunately, Optic, I don't know how they'll be, but they tactically were very good, and they had a lot of firepower as well. I don't know how they'll do now with Hiko in and Naf in-game leading, but that could have been a team that, if they would have kept Stanislaw, maybe they would have, had something going there. There's some teams out there tactically that can certainly probably have an advantage over Fnatic as well. So I just don't know if they'll be able to get away with as much as they used to, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. But I think that even if FaZe, has a lot of skill and tactically going to be pretty good with Kerrigan, I think. Forgot to name them as a team that, like, skill and tactically, like, ratio-wise, would be able to stack up to a Fnatic on paper. But I still think this Fnatic team, even if they do stick with like a really loose style and they just rely on their skill and all that good stuff, I think that they still will be a team that can win tournaments at times when they're in sick form. They can obviously make deep runs in playoffs. They won't be a team that wins 6 titles in a row. Like, that's not going to happen again. I don't think we'll have like another Fnatic era where they're like the clear dominant team for whatever period of time you want to mark it off as. But they will still be a really strong team that will make deep runs. I really do believe that. I think the Inferno coming back might help them out a lot, since that wasn't that they were so dominant on before. So that certainly is something to take into consideration as well, though there are maps still sitting out there like Overpass and Nuke that are going to be weak points for them. Though it seems like they'll probably still maintain power on maps like Cache and Cobble, and such. So, you figure if they can bring their Inferno back on this new version, they have Cache and Cobble locked in. It'll just really be about figuring out their Mirage, I think, and then they'll have a pretty solid map pool as well. And so that's kind of where I'm going to leave that with Fnatic. For Godsent, they've gone full circle with their lineup as well. Just to do a quick note here on this team. Like I said, the only difference is that they have Disco Doppler instead of Palf. They have Twist back. They have Lekro back. They have Pronax, obviously, in-game lead, and they have Schneider still there. This is a team that before all those moves happened in August of 2016, that were doing okay. I mean, there was a couple of events that I remember. I think it was a couple of DreamHack events where they actually had some top 4 finishes. I think one of them might have been actually Malmu. It was DreamHack Malmu, where they had like a top 4 finish. They also had a top 4 finish at that DreamHack Summer event. So they had a couple of events that were going for them pretty decently, to be honest. They also had that SLI League Invitational that they did okay, though there wasn't really many teams at that event, to be honest, that were of quality except for Navi, which they lost to. So they actually had something going for them as well on that team, and I think that like Lekro has developed even more as a player since then. So he's got some skill. I think they have a guy like Twist who can do some opping. He can be a very high skilled player as well. When Schneider has his act together, he can sometimes produce some pretty good stuff. And Disco Doppler seems to be a rifler that may have some potential, though I don't know if his potential that people see in him is as much as it used to be when he was on Epsilon before he had his stint with Fnatic, which kind of had mixed results. But he'll be on a team with some structure, with an in-game leader like Pronax who might be able to better implement him. So I think that they have a decent amount of skill. I think that when you saw the Godsent lineup that was playing with like 4 out of these 5, when they made those finishes at the DreamHack events I was talking about, tactically they were very sound. Seemed like something kind of fell apart with Godsent later on when they had Crims and Flusha and JW back, and then Lekro back for Crims and all that stuff. It seemed like through all the changes and through the negative placings they were getting, that something kind of broke down. Like whether it was Pronax was at a loss, or whether people weren't trusting in him anymore, or whatever it was, it seemed like they lost what should have been one of their strengths, which was the strategy and tactics of Pronax. That's supposed to be what sets them apart from a Fnatic, the fact that they have that strategical advantage. Something there just stopped working when it came to reading the game and implementing tactics and such. So hopefully with this lineup, when they refocus in, Pronax can hopefully get back to his roots of being a solid mid-round shot caller, a guy who can put some cool executes together, a guy who can be revered as one of the top in-game leaders in the world. And then again, you have some skill here with Twist and Lekro for sure, and then it's just about whether Disco Doppler develops well or not. For me, this Godsent team, I don't know that I can see them being in the top 10 of the world anymore. Just simply because I think a team like Astralis is certainly number 1 right now. I think you have teams out there like a VP, like an SK, if everything works out there. Depending on how things work out with this new G2 team, they can certainly be up there. FaZe certainly going to be up there. I think North will probably still remain like a top 10 team. See what Navi is going to do. NIP might still be a team that sits out there and is able to maintain a top 10 spot. So I think there's a lot of teams that will be competing for a top 10 spot, which may push Godsent out of being top 10, but I certainly think they'll be a top 15 team in the world, and maybe they can aspire to start hitting towards the bottom half of the top 10 if everything works out with Pronax and with these players developing and such. I think they still might have the occasional top 4 finish at an event like they were having before, but they won't be, in my opinion, like some type of world-class team that's constantly placing top 4, constantly making deep runs in playoffs, but there's certainly still some value on that team. I think they still will be, someone to consider. I don't think that they'll completely fall off is the point I'm trying to make. So that's just kind of a quick cap of the Swedish Shuffle and looking at the 2 teams that are going to come out of it and how they've both come full circle to like their original lineups, or at least lineups we saw from them, a year and a half ago. And it'll be interesting to see the journeys of these 2 teams. Again, I think we have a Fnatic that's going to be a world-class team again, being built out of this. I think you have a Godsent team that will still be strong, but certainly won't be, like I said, a team that I expect to like produce a lot of deep runs. So let's see what the Fnatic team can do as they bring their old 5 back onto a new team. And if their style can still work, if their players can still find form, it's going to be cool to watch. So yeah, just wanted to put this out there. Thanks so much. Please follow, subscribe for more content.